Tonight was the first time that Beth Brown and I have been described as old friends. I will take that. I have known Beth for as long as I've been in Chicago. I got here in 2016. Beth got here a couple years before that, right? Beth is the pastor of Lincoln Park Presbyterian Church. She came here from Northern California. So the things that somebody who doesn't know Beth would tell you by way of introduction is that in 2017, she was written up in Chicago Magazine for her work in leading Lincoln Park Presbyterian Church to become a sanctuary congregation, and that magazine was interested to learn more about what that is about. You can still find and read that article online. Beth is a leader in our presbytery, in our denomination. I did it again. Beth is a leader in the city. There is a city commission that she is involved in around not just issues to do with the immigrant community and asylum seekers, but lots of different things. She's an important leader in our community. Two things. Beth at one point rode a little motor scooter around. Do you still have the motor scooter? Okay. One time I had told Beth about the new scooter that I had got, meaning the little electrical one. She thought I meant like the little gas one like she's got, and she was disappointed to learn that it's a slow little stand-up electrical one. And here's the last little anecdote. Beth and I ran into each other at Presbytery meeting a couple months ago. We said, hey, let's catch up. And so we made a coffee appointment for a Friday morning the next week. And then I realized that I had somebody coming to my house to do work, and I couldn't leave. And so there's not many people I'd feel comfortable doing this with. I said, Beth, do you want to just come to my house and we'll just have coffee at my house? And Beth said, sure. So we spent a couple hours just in relaxed conversation over coffee at my house, and she's the only person in the whole presbytery who has been in my house. So that's my introduction of Beth Brown, everybody.
Oh, it's so good to be with you tonight, and also to receive the distinction of being the only presbytery member to be in Rocky's house. I mean, I'm putting that at the top of the list of distinctions because that just made me so happy. But what he didn't tell you is that I am his dog's new best friend. I am not sure why he left that part out, but I'm definitely the dog's new best friend. So my name is Beth Brown, and I've been at Lincoln Park Presbyterian Church for 12 years. Hard to imagine. I did come from Northern California, and all of my friends thought I was absolutely nuts for thinking about moving in that direction. But I certainly have not regretted it. Although a couple of those winters with the snowpocalypses, I might have thought, maybe I am a little nuts, but we're beyond those, I think, at this point. So I wanted to give you a little bit of history related to Lincoln Park, just to put in context that I didn't come to Lincoln Park and start a lot of things, that there's just a very long history and was before I ever arrived. But before I start with the history piece, and I'm going to make it interesting, I promise, I wanted to ask you for a little participation here as we get going. And so what I want to know from you is, what are 3 things that you're hoping I'm going to talk about tonight? Protection of
migrants.
Of migrants,
Yeah.
Okay. How we can help protect? Okay.
Why you did it.
Here you go.
Why you did it.
Did what?
Took on the role of the sanctuary church.
Got it, okay. That's helpful.
And how you created consensus within the congregation. I'll just say amen.
I feel like that's the $1 million question right there. Yes.
How you dealt with any problems that have been caused by this, how you handle that.
Okay.
Oh, how you handle that.
How we've handled problems, yeah, okay. So, yes.
Do you have any kind of police protection?
No. That's the answer to that. But
Any
we'll talk about
police
that. We'll talk
protection?
about safety also for the congregation and stuff. All right, that gives me a good idea. And if I forget, you're going to have to remind me because I didn't just write those things down, and I'm of an age where I need to write them down. So, as you know, Lincoln Park, my goodness, started, I mean, as far back as the 60s, which is when we still have people who were there in the 60s, and so that history is told. And so a lot of activism around fair housing, a lot of activism around workers' rights, a lot even around gun violence prevention, even in the 60s, because you might remember, some of you may even live there, Lincoln Park was not then what it is today. There was such a very specific attempt to gentrify in order to move primarily Puerto Ricans and blacks much further west. So Lincoln Park is very different today than it was, but a lot of activism was going on in the congregation. And then in the 70s, a lot of activism around queer rights, because I don't know if you all know this, but David Sint was the man who is famous for standing up at the 1974 General Assembly and holding up a sign saying, "Is anyone else out there gay?" David Sint was a member of Lincoln Park Presbyterian Church. And Lincoln Park is the first known congregation in the Presbyterian Church to call an out gay man. So Lincoln Park called David Sint in 1972 to be the assistant pastor, and the presbytery denied it. So David never got to serve, but that kind of energized David and many folks in the congregation to begin what was then called Presbyterians for Lesbian and Gay Concerns, which ultimately morphed into More Light Presbyterians. So there are some amazing historical documents and videos that you can get through the Presbyterian Historical Society. You can see videos of David. You can read stories about it. We have a church historian named Barry Smith, and Barry has done meticulous reporting and capturing of all of that history. And then, as you know, Jeff Doan started at Lincoln Park in the 80s. And during that time, during that time, there was a lot of work focused on people experiencing homelessness. So we were part of a rotating shelter. And then after many, many years of that, the what's now called the Lincoln Park Community Services, wanted a permanent space, and we were the only one of the churches in Lincoln Park willing to do that, and that happened under Jeff. And so the Lincoln Park Community Services moved into the basement of our church, where they still are. And they now have a second location on Sedgwick. So I tell you all of that, and I could add lots more, but I tell you that just to say that it is a congregation known for justice-oriented action. And when I first got there, we did a major revisioning process, and we were looking at lots of different options. And one of the options was, should we move out of Lincoln Park? Because we didn't feel like we really fit in Lincoln Park as it is now. Or should we merge with another church, or should we close altogether? So we were kind of looking at a lot of those things at that time. And as part of that process, we interviewed the neighbors, and like lots of people in businesses, other churches, just to say, like, what would the impact on you be if we were to move out? And to a person, what we heard was, you're always in the forefront of what's happening with justice stuff. We really want you to stay. So that was a re-energizing moment. And I'm going to sort of skip around a little bit. And then in 2021, we did what's called a future search to get some clarity around some vision. And one of the things that came out of our future search is how important partnerships have been to us over the decades, and how important they're going to be in our future. You know, we're a small congregation, and so partnerships are just amazing when they can happen. I don't know if you know this, but churches aren't great about partnering. I mean, I say that just because it's very hard to get churches to partner. Early on, when we were doing our vigils against violence, we invited all kinds of churches to partner with us on those, and nobody was interested in partnering. And I understand it, because I think as churches we get into this thing of, if it's not our idea and it's not going to be held in our building, we're really not interested. Which I get, because think of the amount of work and all of the things. Like, I get why we do that. But I say that to say, so we started looking for partnerships elsewhere and in the community. And we did that very early on in my time there. So that's kind of the overall history piece to give you the context. And then I will say, coming from California, a lot of my life was spent being neighbors with a lot of immigrant families. And so when I came to Chicago, one of the things I wanted to do was continue with my work in making connections with immigrant organizations, and really wanting to be an advocate for immigrant families. So I got involved with the Resurrection Project, got involved with Southwest Organizing Project, and I was one of the only, if not the only, pastor from the north side of Chicago that was involved with them at that time. So I tell you that because that means I get asked to do things, probably at times when I shouldn't even be asked to do them, but because I represent the north side of Chicago, I'll get asked to come and speak at something. I don't even speak Spanish, which I'm embarrassed about. I wish I did speak Spanish. I speak like 2-year-old Spanish. Let me just say that. I can communicate with our 2- and 3-year-old, but that's about it. So I did a lot, and I'll say, like, part of what I tell younger pastors who ask me how to create the relationships, what I say is, just show up. Just show up, and anytime you get asked to show up, show up. And I feel like that's sort of been my history is, if somebody asks me to do something, I just show up and do it. And because of that, over the years, people know that if they ask me to do something, I'm going to show up. And so that helps, I think, in terms of the long-term relationship and trust, because a lot of white people come in and out of these organizations for one-offs. Or, you get inspired, you've just done an anti-racism training and you want to go and do this thing, and so you show up, and then, a month later, nobody sees you again. So I've tried to, in the areas that I am asked to show up, I try to show up consistently so that the trust can be built. Why is that important? That's important because when Trump was elected in 2016, people in my congregation were devastated. I mean, devastated. And And so immediately after the election, I was getting calls, emails, people coming and saying, what are we going to do? What are we going to do specifically? And so the session asked about becoming a sanctuary church. And so we began to have conversation about it. And you have to remember, because we're so much smaller than you, having a conversation for us is very different than having a conversation for you, right? We have 8 people, 9 people on session, not 25 or 35 or whatever, however big yours is at this point. And we have a lot of conversation. You can talk to 10 people and you've talked to 20% of the congregation. So, it's a different deal in terms of needing to have conversation. But we had conversation, and there were some concerns that were raised, which there should be. Voting to become a sanctuary congregation is a big deal. And wait, I'm going to pause there and tell you one other piece, because this piece is important. Again, the history piece. Back in the early 90s, back in the early 90s, Lincoln Park Presbyterian Church was supporting a woman in sanctuary at the Wellington Avenue United Church of Christ, because Wellington approached Lincoln Park and said, we can house her, but we need financial support and we need other kinds of support. Would you help us with that support? And we did. And the woman was from Guatemala. She was in sanctuary for quite a while. And it was a good experience for everybody. And she's still here and owns her own business, and we still have a relationship with her. And so that's to say that happened back in the 90s. Okay, so fast forward. We're talking about, should we become a sanctuary church? Understanding what it means. It means, to become a sanctuary church is to say we are not going to follow the law in this regard. And so the concerns that were raised, though, were, I bet you can guess. Who can guess what the first question was about? Think about how churches think. We're thinking about bringing somebody into our building. What are we most concerned about? Safety. No, I wish. Money. Insurance. Yeah. What's going to happen to our insurance if we do this? And I don't exactly remember my response in 2016 when that question was asked, but what I say to a lot of churches is, if you don't have enough insurance to cover 5 more people in your building, you do not have enough insurance. That's sort of my basic answer. And then I follow it with, do not call your insurance company and tell them what you're about to do. You do not need to do that. Just like you don't call them to say, we're going to have 30 youth overnight in our building tonight. They do not need to know about a lot of what you do. They just need to insure you. But there were some questions about safety, and also how. How was it going to work logistically? So we identified, we have a weird building. We do not have classrooms and things. So all we had, so we have our sanctuary, our kind of community room, church office, my office, and then a meeting room. And then up some steep stairs, we had a storage area that was full of junk from the last 100 years. And so we identified that area could be made into a 2-room apartment if we would get rid of everything in it, and if we would put in a window in one of the rooms to the outside. So we agreed to do that. So that kind of answered the question of how were we going to do it. But we didn't have a kitchen. We had this tiny little room that you could walk into that had a refrigerator, a counter, another counter, and a little microwave. Like, that was the extent. It was literally like this. And so everybody was like, how are they going to cook? And so we said, there's a microwave there. We can get a hot plate. They're not going to be able to cook with an oven. We have no oven, and here's a refrigerator. Like, it's going to be basic. And then the other question was, where are they going to shower? Well, because we have the shelter downstairs, we knew that we could talk to the shelter about having them come down and shower on the off times when the shelter guests were not showering. So we kind of answered all those questions of how's it going to work? What's it going to look like? How are we going to do? And then somebody raised the question of, well, we can't get a family with kids because those stairs are too steep. So we had to work through that. And, you know, my thing was, yeah, somebody could fall. I could fall every time I go up there. Anybody can fall down those stairs when they go up there. And we'll have to, you know, talk with the parents about making sure they're kind of with the kids as they're coming down the stairs. Like, so I think part of it was just letting everybody get out their fears. There were some fears, right? Which of course there are going to be. And so letting people just say, this is what I'm afraid of. And then we'd talk through it and say, this is how we respond to that. And my thing was, living on the street versus somebody might fall down the stairs, like, you know, I think if families want to take that risk, we can take that risk. So we made the decision, and what was tricky about it is that the Tribune wanted to do a story because they heard about it, and they really thought that if they could tell the story, that it might encourage other churches to have similar conversations, which I think was true in the end. But it also like put it on a whole different level. And in the end, nobody sought sanctuary. I don't think it was because the story was public, because honestly, anybody that's going to take somebody into sanctuary, it's going to be a very public story. It has to be, because part of why you take somebody into sanctuary is to get enough community support and emotion going around it that the courts end up being swayed. Kind of like what we've seen. I was at the press conference on Monday night for Alfredo, whose brother, Jose Gregorio, has been in detention and needs to donate the kidney. And, you know, that's an example of if you get enough public support and emotion going, sometimes the decision can be swayed in the right direction. And that same principle happens with sanctuary. So it wasn't bad that the story got out, but I will say I started getting some bizarre emails from people from all over the country. And I mean, like, some of the emails were from hackers from Anonymous saying they wanted to protect me, and so they were gonna set up this whole way that I could communicate with people. I was like, what? And then a ton of emails about starting an underground railroad, and was I going to be the one to organize it? And like, I mean, it was wild. But we did a lot of organizing. So we didn't have anybody come into sanctuary, still did a lot of organizing with TRP, with SWAP. And then what happened is in late 2018, the Wellington Church came to us again and said, so you don't have anybody in sanctuary, would you consider housing an asylum-seeking family that just got put out on the street by this apartment they were living in? They lost everything. And so we talked about it, and quickly everybody said, yeah. And I should say that the Wellington Church by that time had helped to organize a group that's called the Sanctuary Working Group. And it's made up of more than 30 organizations, faith communities, and they have been supporting immigrants solidly for as long as I've been in Chicago almost. I don't know that they were always called the Sanctuary Working Group, but eventually they took on that name. So we agreed to house this family. It was a mom, her younger sister, the mom's daughter, and the dad of the daughter. So they all were going to live together. And so they moved in, and we gave them some money for living expenses, but the Wellington Church gave them much more money than we did because we hadn't prepared for it. And then a couple people from the Wellington Church provided case management. So helped them with their asylum case. They had lawyers, of course, but just with certain pieces of it, helped the daughter get into school, lots of pieces like that. So they were with us for about 6 or 7 months, and then they moved out, and then immediately another family moved in. Like they were waiting. So we have been housing people in our building since then nonstop. And in 2020, we decided to do a capital campaign in order to do a remodel so that we could make a full kitchen, 2 bathrooms, because we only had 1 bathroom for the entire church, and a shower in one of the bathrooms. So we did the capital campaign, so we started the remodel in March of 2020, and then everything shut down. So it went on the whole time that we were shut down. But we had someone living in our space during that time. And it hasn't just been families from Mexico, Central, or South America. We had one young man from Uganda who we're still in very close relationship with. We still see all of the families except for the first one, because they moved to Arizona, where they would be warmer, because they hated the weather in Chicago. But they were given asylum. So their asylum case came up right toward the end of them living with us, and they were actually granted asylum. The young man from Uganda who filed for asylum, he filed in 2019. He doesn't even have a court date scheduled yet, just to give you a sense of the backlog. So we just started housing, people one after another, no time in between. And then when all of the migrants were coming to Chicago, and so many of them were sleeping on police station floors, right around that time, I was asked to speak at a breakfast where faith communities were encouraged to come and hear about what was happening with all of the migrants coming to Chicago. So I said a lot of things at that breakfast. I can get fiery, as you might imagine. But one of the things I said is, we have 11,000 faith communities in the city of Chicago. If even a small portion of us were willing to house a family in our building, we could get everybody out of the police stations tomorrow. So somebody came up to me afterward and said, so why aren't we doing that? And I said, well, nobody's organizing it. And then I was like, oh. So I knew that I was the one that was supposed to organize it. And so I did a couple of things. The first thing I did was I talked to Alderwoman Maria Haddon, and I said, I'm going to start this thing, and I need you to work with the Johnson administration to make sure they're not going to shut it down, because I don't want to launch it if they're going to shut it down. So she started working on that. It took her 3 weeks to get them to say, we won't shut it down. At the same time, I started, how do you start something like this? Started, writing on paper what it could be. Took it to my session, said, I have this idea, I think we're supposed to do it. And they said, great, we support you in doing it, and we can't pay for it. So as long as you get money for it, we're with you. This is a great story. That night, I was on my way home from the session meeting. It was 9:30, and I notice on my phone, while I'm driving, I notice on my phone that a text has come in, and it says, Pastor Beth, it's Senator Sarah. Call me. And at that time, I was on the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability, and we had been getting spammed a lot and like getting a lot of weird stuff. So I was like, oh, this is not real. So I drove for 10 more minutes, and then I was like, wait a minute, what if it is real? So at like 9:45, 10 to 10, I call, Senator Sarah, it's Pastor Beth, what's up? She says, I have some money for you. And I say, wow, what for? Well, she had set aside, the senators can do this, she had set aside a big chunk of money for us and the shelter. And I said to her, I'm working on a new thing that I need money for. Can I tell you about it, and would you consider switching the money for that? So she listened, she said, wow, that's a great idea. Let me see what I can do about the money. 3 days later, she calls me and says, done. You have a grant for $250,000 from the state of Illinois. Well, it wasn't that easy. Oh my gosh. I never in my life want to work with the state again on a grant. It was the hardest thing we've done. But $250,000. So I hired a program manager, 2 case managers, a part-time financial person, and then we had money in different pots to help immigrant families. So we began a huge outreach effort. You know, lots of stories were done. We held a big press conference with like 18 people. I mean, it was massive. And launched what we called the Faith Community Initiative. And the initiative is getting other faith communities to house people using the model that we have developed with the Sanctuary Working Group in Wellington over time. So, and the model is you bring someone in, you give them living expenses, they're fully independent in your space, they make their own meals, they do their own grocery shopping, you know, all the things they would do if they were in an apartment. You work with them on all the things they need, so getting connected to insurance if that applies, getting kids in school, mental health support if that's what they need, jobs, work permits, getting asylum applications filed. So once they get their work permit, then we make sure they're working for a couple of months, and then we help them transition into their own apartments. So that's kind of the basic model. And what happens is sometimes a church will say, we can house, but we can't afford the living expenses. And then we say, is there another church in your sphere that you would like to partner with, or do you want us to find you a partner? And sometimes people say, yeah, we've got this church that we do a lot of things with. Let us ask them. We had a Jewish synagogue that was not able to house anybody in their building, but they took on the support of this woman and her kids, and they've been absolutely incredible. And they were a case where they couldn't live in a church because the godson was in detention, and in order to get him out of detention, they had to be in their own apartment. So the temple just, you know, immediately started supporting them with rental support, living support. So it's just been incredible. So the Faith Community Initiative is still going. Our state grant ended June 30th of last year. I started way before then talking to foundations about getting funding, and we were not able to get big funding from foundations. And so I was able to get one person, not in Chicago, but one person gave a donation of $50,000. And then the Presbytery gave us a grant for $100,000. And so we are living on that money. So we had to downsize a little bit. So our program manager, who is phenomenal, moved over to become the program manager for the Sanctuary Working Group. And I'm now doing some of those responsibilities. Before, I was just kind of overseeing all of it. And we still have our 2 full-time case managers and our fiscal person. So we're continuing to operate. We have about 15 churches that are housing anywhere from 1 to 4 families. We have 2 new churches that are coming online in April, early May, because I think, when Trump was elected again, everybody started saying, we want to do something, what can we do? And our church thinks they want to house somebody, can you help us figure that out? And so those 2 churches are a direct result of how the election went. And we do, I'm getting ready to train their volunteer team. I'm doing a safety training with their entire congregation. And then, we'll help them get their space ready to bring people in. So that kind of brings you up to the present moment. The way our funding is going, we'll probably begin to close down our Faith Community Initiative around the end of October, because we'll run out of money unless foundations do something different. Who knows? But I suspect it's going to start coming to a close. One of the important things to remember is that, and I say this a lot of churches are drawn to refugee ministry, partly because Refugee One is amazing here in Chicago, and so they do a great job of outreach, and I think people really feel the plight of refugees. And one of the things that I've tried to share with a lot of churches is it's very different being a refugee than it is being someone who's in this country seeking asylum. Because refugees have, hopefully will still have, federal money that goes into supporting them. So the thing that I always tell people is when you're an asylum seeker, you're starting at home base, or 2 feet from home base. When you are a refugee coming into this country, you're actually starting on 3rd base. And everybody's like, but refugees have nothing. How can you say that? And the difference is they have access. So they get immediate access to a way to work, to legal documentation, insurance, all the benefits that come for refugees that don't necessarily come for asylum seekers. So that's an important distinction to make. I do think I would be remiss if I didn't say, and I'm sure you all know this, but I want to say it. So much of the rhetoric that's happening right now with this administration is around all of the people who came into the country illegally. And I am here to tell you, there have been legal ways to get into the country. Most of the families we work with came into the country legally, meaning they had an appointment to come in. One of our families that we housed was in a camp in Mexico for 2 years. They came from Guatemala. In a camp in Mexico for 2 years, waiting for their name to be drawn in the lottery. Finally, after 2 years, their name was drawn, and they got to go across the border. They came to Chicago to us. 2 years in a camp. They crossed legally. So I just, every time you hear, these illegal, they crossed illegally, all of that, make sure in your mind you're saying, not all of them are crossing illegally, because that is such misinformation. Having said that, most of those legal ways are now closed, including to refugees, although that's being, like everything, it's being contested in the courts. I want to say a couple other things. One is, when we launched the Faith Community Initiative, we thought as a congregation that we should do what we're asking other churches to do, which is go to the police station, get a family, and then bring them into the church. So we wanted to see how it goes, because we were going to be doing it with other congregations. So we took only meeting room, which is right next to my office, and made that into another apartment. And we had a family of 5 living there. They moved out last June, and now we have a family of 6 living in that room. So we have two different apartments. People want to know, are we in danger? And I will say that yes and no. We are, in the sense that if ICE decides to start going after churches, they could certainly come to our church and try to get to our families. They could come and arrest me. I certainly have been very public, and I have written a number of things, and so it will be no secret how I feel about all these things. But I don't think that's going to happen. But I have lawyers lined up in case it does. And I say that in all seriousness. Like, I have lawyers who are willing to spring right to action if I were to be arrested. The thing about, so after the inauguration, I was on, oh my goodness, national calls, state calls, city calls, all about like, what are we going to do about all these things that are coming, and how are we going to be prepared, and also the question of what's going to happen when Trump rescinds the sensitive locations memo, because we all knew he was going to do that. I'm not sure we all knew it was going to happen on day one, but we figured it would happen very quickly. And nobody on the calls could really answer questions that people would ask about faith communities. So I developed a training and then started training faith leaders and congregations in understanding the sensitive locations memo and how to protect yourself as a faith community. And in about a 5-week period, I think I trained about 300 people. So, so my whole thing about that is knowledge is everything, especially right now. So knowing what they can do and not do is critical. And as faith communities, we are considered private. We're like a private business, if you will. And that means ICE cannot enter our building without a signed judicial warrant. It's very difficult to get a signed judicial warrant. And just to give you an idea, from 2016 to 2020, there's only one known situation where they actually had a signed judicial warrant when they were knocking on doors. They faked it many times. So what they did the last time is they'd show a signed judicial warrant that, if you look closely, had already expired. Or they'd show the regular like ICE warrant, which is very different than a signed judicial warrant. And people, you know, in the fear of the moment would think it was a signed judicial warrant. So money is involved. Everything gets complicated. We have no money. I mean, you know, it's sort of like money is not involved. Nobody can take our funding away. You know what I mean? In that sense, like, we do not have to be afraid in that way.
But
and
they have power. They have more power than he does.
I know, but money is involved. You have to understand, like, Columbia University. Who can understand Columbia University? And they're saying, yeah, but the 400 million. 400 million versus the kind of...
But if they go to court, they'll win, and they will get their money back. It may take a long
I
time,
know.
but it'll happen.
I know. And here's the thing, though. Like, all the bigger institutions have always... I mean, Walter Brueggemann has been saying forever about the church that, you know, you are never going to be prophetic in the ways you need to be prophetic as long as you are stuck in this sort of capitalistic, you know, you're worried about who's going to pull their money from you, right? Like, he was such a good one for railing like the prophets. But I say that to say it is a factor. And so I'm trying to, and I don't know that I'm brave as much as I am mad.
Right.
So mad, and also like I feel such compassion for the people I know. And so on bad days, I get really snarky about people who are not standing up with courage. But on my better days, I just think until we walk in each other's shoes, we have no idea how complicated those decisions are. There was a time when I was asked to get arrested. Who knows what we were protesting at the time, but it was here in Chicago, down on LaSalle Street. And I had so much going on personally at the time that I had to say, I cannot get arrested. And from the outside, anybody who doesn't know my story could have looked at that and said, wow, she's willing to show up at all these things, but she's not willing to get arrested.
Well, I understand that, but I will say that when one has a lot of money, they have much more power than you do or I do. And my feeling is that someone that has that kind of money does have a responsibility to, do what they can to make sure our nation keeps its principles.
I wish.
And I'm not going to say any more because there may be other people with questions.
I wish everybody felt that way, though. And it's complicated. It's,
Yes, I have a two-part question.
Okay.
Number one, under what charges could they arrest you? And have your view of what your defense would be? And number two, how do some of these incredibly needy families get in touch with the faith-based organization? I see people out on street corners, mothers with young children, with no place to go. Where do you tell them to go? What do you say?
Yeah, I'm going to answer the second one first. It's so hard. There are so many people we haven't been able to help. And some of the families have been severely, severely traumatized. And so, we have a situation right now where a family's living in a church, and it just, for a lot of reasons, it's not working out well. The church doesn't have enough Spanish-speaking volunteers, and the mom just isn't understanding a lot of things, and so we're going to have to ask her to leave the church, and that means her option is to go into a family shelter. So the city of Chicago merged all the shelters, as you know. Right now, they have shelter space for about 1,500 beds for families. And I think currently maybe have like 1,100 in those shelters. So anybody you see on the street, you can tell about the shelter.
They call 311?
They call 311,
Okay.
Yep. Or they can go to, what's the address? I think it's 924 North Christiana. It's the Salvation Army. It's sort of like the welcome center or whatever for families.
Okay.
But 311 is probably a good bet. And then the first part of your question was what again?
What charges?
What charges? Oh yeah. So there's under the harboring, aiding and abetting, it's kind of a big category, and I'm sure Trump will use it. I don't worry too much. You have to do all of those things willingly knowing that someone is here illegally. And I think, first of all, we have a great religious argument for even if they are here illegally, people need a place to sleep and food to eat, right? Like, we have a great religious argument. But the second thing is we have a lot of deniability about people crossing illegally. So we could say, no, we were told they're here legally. I mean, who knows what will happen in court. I think the administration will go after pastors of color more than they're going to come after people like me. if they're going to make test cases, they're going to get somebody who's either like newly a citizen or not quite like they're going to go after. And Latinos, for sure. I think our Latino siblings who are pastors are in more danger, for sure.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. Except for the one family that you said moved on because it was warmer.
I'm
What are
sorry.
some of the other reasons that people might move on to, I can't use that, to another place? I mean, how long do they usually stay?
So they usually stay, our model is they would normally stay anywhere from 6 months to a year. And some of that depends on how long does it take them to get their work permit, then to find work, be stable for a couple of months, and then be ready to move out. So it's different for every family. We have a family, the family living with us, they're coming up on a year in June, but they're not going to get their work permits until like July or something. So we'll have to see. He's had very steady work, fortunately, even without a work permit. And so we try not to go beyond a year because we have seen that people sort of go backwards sometimes and don't do as well if the support goes on and on and on. So we're always watching out for that. Yeah. And we do financial workshops. Like the Resurrection Project does this great financial workshop with families. So we'll host a financial workshop and invite a bunch of families, and just so that people know like what things, because it's, a lot of times when people are getting ready to move out, we'll say, so let's look at your finances. And, it's like they want to rent an apartment that's $1,600 and they have like maybe $2,000 coming in for the month. And we're like, how is this going to work? So, and, families have gotten creative. This one woman was determined. She moved out and rented 2 out of 3 bedrooms to other people. And so her rent was $500 instead of $1,500. So, people figure out ways to do it, but, that doesn't always go well. And I will say, landlords, by and large, really ripping people off. If you could see some of the physical things I've seen in terms of apartments people are paying for, literally, I've seen photos with rats in them, cockroaches walking all over the wall, like water in the basement. It's horrifying.
Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, one more.
So, hi, Beth.
Hi.
So, if ICE shows up on North Michigan Avenue and goes into the Four Seasons Hotel and people over there come over here for shelter or sanctuary, and we're not a sanctuary church, what's our responsibility? What happens when ICE comes following them or knocks on the door? Or, I think that's a possibility because there's so many hotels, right, and restaurants here.
Yeah, great question. Let me make a distinction. So the term sanctuary is being used broadly right now. And a sanctuary church is a church that has said, we will take someone into sanctuary, and that means someone who has an active order of deportation against them, and their only option to keep from being deported is to seek sanctuary in a church. That's kind of the original use of the word sanctuary church. And then there's the use of the word, like Regan is using it, which is, can we just offer sanctuary for 5 hours or 10 hours if ICE is around in the neighborhood? And the answer to that is, I would think so. It depends on your session, probably. But if somebody were to come to your door and say, we're over there and ICE is here and we need to be kept safe, you could certainly bring them in. The key is you either have to have locked doors to keep ICE out, or you need to have someone go and approach ICE before they ever come inside, or you need to have very clear signage that says, ICE, I mean, I have a sign that I could send you with the right wording on it, but it basically says, ours says, Immigration and Custom Enforcement agents are not welcome in this building without a signed judicial warrant. Kind of like you have the little gun sign on your doors, right? Like, don't come in here with a gun. You could add that sign, and what that means is that they're not supposed to come in. You know, our biggest time of worry is Sunday mornings when our front door is open. We do not have someone standing outside, but we're also not in a neighborhood where ICE is likely to be. We don't have enough concentration of people. So the likelihood is low. If we were a church in Pilsen, I'd have people outside every Sunday, like not just at the front door, but on the corners of the blocks. Like, you know, you have to kind of know your area and come up with a plan for what happens if. The other thing that you could do is if you have Rocky's office, for example, you could take people into Rocky's office, and if he has a sign on his door that says, private, no entry, staff only, they cannot get into his door or the door that lets you into all the staff offices without a signed judicial warrant. So.
Bob has one more question.
Yeah.
I used to work with the Federal Marshals group. You know, they had the Witness Protection Program. And I would see these folks, it would just break your heart because, I mean, so that leads up to this thought about how do these traumatized people who come to you and others, how do they access any kind of not only mental health services, but all the attending somatic illnesses and injuries?
Yeah.
So
that is such a good question. And I will say, one of the things that ended up happening with our program is that we started getting requests about people with either disabilities, severe disabilities, or chronic or terminal illnesses. So we ended up housing the people in kidney failure, the two men, one paralyzed from the waist down, one paralyzed from the shoulders down, terrible, unhealable sores. And, you know, our hospitals have been treating most folks. Nobody's going to be able to pay the bill, but they've been treating them. I think and kids, like we had a little girl that was with a family in a church waiting for heart surgery, and she had to get out of the family shelter because she was constantly exposed to all these illnesses. And so, you know, we were able to get her into a church where they could live by themselves. So we ended up kind of being the safety net for a lot of the people with very serious concerns. The mental health piece is really difficult. There aren't enough Spanish-speaking mental health caregivers. And accessing them is very difficult. You know, I wish we had a cadre full of retired social workers, counselors, therapists, where we could have a translator and somebody who's retired could sit and do some of the trauma care. We have a woman who needs help with, she needs to be mentored in parenting. She needs to be mentored in how to do the grocery shopping. She definitely needs help with money and how to do what she needs to do with money. Like every task of daily living, she needs help with, and that's way beyond the scope of what we're able to do. But again, like anybody who is retired and feels like they can give time, sometimes we can find translators. There are people who will say, I speak Spanish, I can translate for anybody. So if you think you have a skill that somebody could use, let us know and we'll try to find a translator. Because there just aren't enough people. And I think, the organizations are doing amazing, amazing, amazing work, and there just aren't enough of them. Yeah. So thanks.
Thanks so much, Beth.
Yeah,
we
thanks,
have to let her
everybody.
go. She has an event up at her own church, so thank you so much for
You're
being
welcome.
here. It
And
was
one more
wonderful.
little plug. If you want to donate to the Faith Community Initiative, you can go to the Lincoln Park Presbyterian Church website, or you can go to the website for faithcommunityinitiative.org, either way. And then in the notes, just put Faith Community Initiative, and whatever you donate will go toward the Faith Community Initiative. And right now, we're using a lot of money. We got smaller grants that we can use for rental support, food support, help. We're now buying plane tickets for people self-deporting. So it's a whole host of things. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.